Well, it's now Thursday of the Easter week, and I'm sharing some thoughts from Matthew 27. The passage today goes verse 1 to 2 and then jumps down to 11 to 23. But I'm just going to read a few verses kind of in the middle of that, beginning in verse 11. It says this: Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, and this is the part I want you to really think about here with me for a minute, "Do you not hear how many things they have testified against you?" But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, there are lots of pretty amazing miracles throughout the Easter story. Obviously, the greatest is Christ's resurrection from the dead after his crucifixion. But if you think back to the story, there's Christ. He's prophesying about a number of events that are going to happen, about the betrayal, the denial. There's the curtain being torn. There's rocks being split, tombs being opened, and the dead being raised to life. Like, there is a boatload of amazing, miraculous moments. But there's only one that evokes the common New Testament word that people use to describe a response to a miracle. And it's a strange word. It actually is existemi, which actually means to displace or to move alongside, which is like, well, what does that have to do with miracles? Over time, the word kind of evolved to mean to be beside oneself. So you can kind of think of that displacement or moving of something to somewhere else to come to mean to be beside yourself. And I don't know if you ever heard that expression of like, I was beside myself, meaning you were amazed or astounded. That's the reaction that we get throughout the New Testament to the miracles that we see, that particularly Jesus does. So if you think back to earlier in Matthew chapter 12, there's a man who's both blind and deaf, and Jesus heals him, and he can speak and see. And all the people were beside themselves, or as it's going to say in English, they were amazed. Or actually some translations say they were amazed with a great amazement, because the emphasis is on how astounding this event is. Or Mark 2, the man who was paralyzed, if you remember, he's let down through the roof from his friends. Jesus forgives his sins first, and then he actually heals him, and he says, "Get up, take your mat and walk," and he does. And the whole crowd is amazed. Or in the story of the daughter of Jairus who dies, and Jesus raises her to life. Again, the response is the parents were amazed with this great amazement. Into Acts, that's the word that shows up when the Spirit comes upon the apostles and they start to speak in different languages, and so people can hear the gospel in their own languages, and the response of the crowd is they are amazed. It shows up again a little bit later with a series of signs and miracles in Acts chapter 13. It's this word that describes people seeing and experiencing miracles. Now, in Matthew 27, it shows up. It's the only time actually that we get this word amazement around the miracles of the Easter story. And it's not with the rocks cracking or the temple being torn or even the dead coming out of the tombs. It's this moment where Pilate has a question to Jesus in verse 13. And then if you look at verse 14, Jesus doesn't answer, and Pilate is greatly amazed. The sense of it is like that he's just witnessed a miracle of sorts. Now, I wonder if you ever thought of what this miracle is. Now, to try to see if I can illustrate it, I've got to use a story from my past along with a really geeky photo that I'm sure Andrew will make a little bit bigger. This is me. This is my family. On the one side is my sister Ruth, who's now married to Pastor Dave. My parents in the middle, looking pretty young and dapper there. Me in the fun tie and the hair parted in the middle. Somewhere, I think this is actually probably a little bit later than the story, but when I was in elementary school, I started a collection. Every kid has to collect something, right? It's just a rite of passage. I collected two things, both kind of weird in hindsight, and I don't know if I was encouraged in these or if they were just spontaneous. I collected bugs, so I had these really weird boards with bugs pinned to them. That's kind of a little bit disturbing now when I think about it. I also collected postcards. And I don't even know where that came from, but I had this big shoebox with all these postcards in it. I don't think any of them were particularly valuable. They were just kind of like you'd go on a trip and you'd buy a postcard, and then people knew I was collecting and they would give me postcards. Well, one day my dad came home with a package of really old postcards, and these all of a sudden made my collection pretty legit. Like, they were from, I think, like 1920s, almost looked like handmade kind of postcards. I was very excited. Now, the piece you need to know, the rest of the story, is that my sister also had a collection. She collected stamps. That's a little bit more conventional collection. You get stamps, and sometimes she would get envelopes. People would give her envelopes with stamps from other places. Now, to get stamps off, at least this is what she did. I don't know if this is the official way. You would soak it in a little tray of water, and then the glue would lift, and you could take the stamp, and of course the envelope would go in the garbage because it's now wet and soggy. Now, here's the important part of the story. The postcards from like 1920s had actually been mailed. They were used, which meant that they had to have a stamp on them. Now, 2 collections, 2 siblings. Can you start to imagine where this story is going to go? Because I was collecting them for the postcards. My sister got a hold of these things. I think unbeknownst to me, because my recollection of the story is walking into the family room, seeing my postcards being bathed in trays of water. I think they were like cookie sheets full of water so that she could lift the stamps, and in the process destroyed the most valuable part of my collection. And I remember kind of freaking out. I blanked out. It's put out of my memory what happened. I just remember what happened next, which was me getting sent to my room, knowing that an impending moment of doom was going to come. And I remember there trying to proclaim my innocence. It's like, I know I got upset with her, but don't you understand what she did? Like, she did a far worse thing. She destroyed my postcard collection, and she's getting off scot-free. Now, I bring that all up because I think that helps when I read through this story of understanding a little bit of what is so amazing about this. Jesus has been accused of a number of things. In fact, Luke 23 tells us some of them. He was accused of inciting the crowd, of like basically raising a riot. He was accused of telling people they shouldn't give money to Caesar, which is ironic because he had actually told them they should do that and then they should give themselves to God. He was accused of claiming to be a king, which I suppose has a hint of truth, although I think we would know he claims to be the king. And last but not least, he was accused of misleading the people. The irony of those things, if you think about the story, his enemies, the religious leaders, are the ones who are actually misleading the people about who he is. They are the ones actually inciting the crowds. They'll do it in the next few verses as they essentially create a riot so that Barabbas is freed and Jesus is put to death. It's like this moment of horrific injustice where Jesus has done nothing wrong. In fact, Pilate's going to, in a few verses, say, this man is innocent. If you think back to my moment with me and my sister and our little dispute, it's like my gut reaction is to say, I might have done something wrong, but she's done something far worse, and she should be punished, not me. And yet here we find Jesus having done nothing wrong, having not done any of the things he's accused of, and ironically his enemies have done those very things to him and about him, and yet when he is asked the question, would you respond, he doesn't say what I would have said, which is, are you kidding me? I'm innocent, look at everything that they've done. Instead, he's silent. And the governor, Pilate, is greatly amazed because he realizes he is watching a miracle of sorts, the miracle of restraint, the miracle of the God-man who does not respond the way every one of us would have responded, which was to attempt to somehow proclaim our innocence and to point out the sin and fault of the other people in the story. And I find that to be an amazing moment here in the Easter story. And I suppose amazing because as I think of the bigger picture of what the story all leads us to, I think of 2 passages, one in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, which says that for our sake, he, meaning God, made him, meaning Jesus, to be sin who knew no sin. In other words, Jesus was sinless, and yet our sin was placed on him. He was the only innocent one in the whole story, and yet wouldn't even proclaim his innocence and wouldn't point out the sin of others because he knew he was going to go to the cross. And the reason he goes to the cross is recorded for us in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. And as soon as I flip there and read it for you, I'm sure it'll be a familiar one to you because we read this. But God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The perfect, spotless sacrifice. God's one and only Son, sent because of God's incredible love. It doesn't mean that there aren't other aspects to the story of God's righteousness and holiness. But there in Romans 5, Paul says, as you come to Easter, never forget the miracles you see, the work of Christ on your behalf, going to the cross when he could have said, I'm innocent, Others are guilty. Instead, the sinless, spotless Lamb of God dies in our place, died in my place. And that's one of the great things of the Easter story. I'll leave that with you. Enjoy reading through the rest of the passage, meditating on those things from Matthew chapter 27. Don't forget that tomorrow, Friday, there'll be a Good Friday service here in Vernon, 6 o'clock. Out in Falkland, they have a service at 10. There is a pancake breakfast for the Falkland campus at 9. That's at the Faith Mission Camp, both those things. So here in Vernon at Emmanuel, out in Falkland, 9 and 10 at the camp. And I'm looking forward to worshiping with you Friday at Emmanuel. God bless.